First of all, I must say how grateful, how very honored and special this is for me today to be invited here to South Dakota. I have had the honor and the privilege, and it's very humbling in many ways, to have been invited to tell the story and to share the message I'm bringing here for you today in 22 other states, and now South Dakota is 23. And to put your feet on the ground and to get them new to people and to get an opportunity just to pass along the message and the purpose of why I make all these trips and why I have been doing this. I'm going to call my presentation today a journey. It's a journey from pain, horrible pain, to peace. And that peace came a lot through with my work in forgiving, through forgiveness. And it's a journey I never, ever, ever would have thought I'd be going down this path, ever. Sometimes you start your life and you've had a wonderful family life, you've had a wonderful upbringing, you had a great education, you've just gotten so many opportunities in life, and of course all the way through them, especially from a good Catholic that was born in a large eight children in the family, Catholic family, you really wanted to do something, you wanted to find God's calling. That was a part of how we were raised. Finding where you could take the talents and the gifts that God gave you and go out and make a difference. And that was certainly how I thought, and I kept asking God all along this journey, and you'll hear about various stages of the path that I went. What is it that you want from me, Father? I would be here. I am your servant. I want to know which way to go. But I thought with all these educational opportunities and then starting out teaching at a university and in my field, which was mostly sociology and social work, and the gifts that came with doing that, it was just absolutely a direction I knew what to do. Teaching. I loved to be a teacher. Of course, you know what? My husband still says this too. Vicki, you know, you were born on the Feast of Pentecost. And as my mother said years ago, and she hasn't stopped talking since. I think there was a little message there, right? But it's been a good one. And so as I go through this message today, since I've had the great honor of working with Deacon Denny here, and getting to come here through that, and yesterday spending time with him, I told him that when I start going through this story, I always have to bring my Kleenex. Some parts of it are a little difficult, a little emotional, so you would understand when you hear this, right? So if I forget to say something or a story he really, really wanted me to say, which he said a couple of times yesterday, I want him to just remind me, okay? He's permitted to interrupt at times. And then also at the end, I hope we can have some questions and answers to see if there's more information that I can hopefully provide, because you can't get through everything, obviously, of the story in the time period, obviously. Okay? So I want to talk about just sitting down on the airplane yesterday, heading out here, and I have this little book I live by. It's called Living Faith. And it's Catholic daily devotions and things to read and inspire you. And it's such a help for me in my work. And here it was Saturday, October 17th. Well, it was actually the 16th yesterday, but I was reading the thing for today. And I thought, oh my God, this is some way of making me understand what this is about. And it says that there comes a moment in all of our lives when we are called to give explicit testimony. Perhaps it will be in a gathering when the faith is challenged. Or it might be when we are faced with difficult decisions challenging our Christian values. It can be a little frightening to anticipate such a moment. Will we be up to it? Will I be ready? But today's scriptures, for today, tell us not to worry. The Holy Spirit will strengthen us and inspire us. So how will you bear your witness of faith today? Isn't that amazing? And that is exactly what I thought I'd be here to do. But I want to start kind of at the very beginning, and there'll be times we flash around, but I want to ask you to walk with me in this journey. Put your feet in my shoes and imagine going through this. Because I want you to think, what would I have done in this situation? Because you may want to go a little different path, or you may think, because I would never, ever have guessed I would take this path. Never. So, I'm going to start reading or introducing you to the star of the show, the person whose story this is all about. This is a picture of my daughter Shannon. This is Shannon's story, and it's what changed my whole life, and is very much the reason why I'm here today. She was a beautiful, beautiful woman. What parent doesn't think that of their child, right? But she was just not only in the outside beautiful, but incredibly beautiful on the inside. Such a loving and generous, kind person, such a gift in life. And sometimes you don't understand that when you're looking to them at your child just the minute they're born and thinking, oh, but I remember praying, oh, whatever potential it is you offer, help me to be a good parent, to actualize that, to make something wonderful come out of this gift and make a difference here. She grew up with that model. Oh, Mom and Dad always said I had to make a difference, so she had to keep finding it. Of course, I've been searching for that in many ways in my life too. But I have to just give you a little bit about it. She was born and raised in Maryland. That's where I live right now. She was so gifted from the beginning in terms of, well, if you've been a teacher for years, you understand this. How many of us know our children at age 18 months could say their alphabet? How many of us think at 3 years of age, our child can open books and read at the 2nd or 3rd grade level? At 3 years of age. Of course, there's some people who would like to say, oh, Vicki, you probably had that ruler, given your background as a teacher, snapping on her knuckles saying, how much have you read today, Shannon? What have you done about it? No, it came so naturally to her. She was just a voracious reader. She loved to read. She so loved to learn. And she loved to share it with everything. Now, she got straight A's in school. She hardly even had to open a book. My husband and I, we went through this a lot together. We'd look at each other many times saying, oh, I don't know. We weren't like that when we grew up. We didn't have all that. She just did. It was just amazing. But one thing about it, even when she was going to school, starting out grade school, she had Catholic education and wonderful opportunities. She would say, when she was going through that, she would say, still, Mom and Dad, I have to make a difference. You keep saying that. What am I going to do when I learn all this? How am I going to do something with it? Well, if you would have asked me a week, a month, or even a year before I got the horrible call where someone told me that there was a dead body in the university campus area and I had to come and identify it. It was my daughter's body, and my husband and I had to find it and go up there and identify it. It's the worst thing you can imagine. Imagine waking and getting that information and how you must feel. I tell you, there's as natural, as much as I know about sociology and everything, the usual feeling is anger. That's normal. That's human. Anger, wanting revenge. How could this happen to her? She had so many gifts. Why, God? Why, God? Well, I remember when I was up there in Philadelphia, she was working on her PhD at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania on a full scholarship at age 22. She was accepted into that school. She graduated from Duke University in 3 years with a triple major in mathematics, economics, and philosophy. Again, I could never have done that. She just had this incredible gift, and she really felt responsible about it. That was one of the best traits about her. It's not what happens to you, what do you make of it? I have to do something to make a difference. You've always told me that, Mom and Dad. And so, we kept trying to encourage it in every way possible. We had a great gift of families. My husband and I were each 5th born of 8 children in very large Catholic families in the Midwest, Illinois and Missouri. And we just had, it's wonderful, we met working on our PhD dissertations. His was from Notre Dame University, where we eventually got married, and mine was Washington University, where I worked. And we went back into teaching and everything, which is why we ended up, after the Midwest, in Maryland, because of my job was at the University of Maryland, first of all, and my husband was working in governmental kind of research and economics, which was his major. So, here we are in there, and we're so happy with this girl, and she could finally get accepted to school, and she went on to graduate school, but never would we have guessed. So imagine when you get this call. Just have to tell you what happened that night, and this is a hard part, but it's very important to what we go forward with in this story. After we got this call, we immediately went up there and drove up there, and the police had been at the door, we found out, the night before. Apparently she lived in an apartment building with 3 floors, And we had done all our research ahead of time, like doing parents should always do. We'd asked the university when we moved to there, have you checked? I want a really safe neighborhood in the city. I wanted to be a place where she can meet and talk to people, other graduate students. She certainly, if you think of all her degrees and everything else, you'd think she was maybe a little nerdish. No. She was very outgoing. She wasn't sitting in front of the computer. She was very involved in social justice programs, social action programs, partly because of where her mom came, and we were involved in the parish social justice committee. We went out and did work in the inner city stuff. We really, this is where this whole background of wanting to do something came so strongly. So we get this call, we get up there, and lo and behold, we find out that there had been a 911 call the night before. She was in the apartment up late studying. Sadly, it was a Thursday night on the day before she took her last exam in finance. She was supposed to come home on Sunday, which was Mother's Day. She was getting all ready to be packed up and come home, but she had this big exam that night. She was very nervous, up late studying at night. And apparently this person, the assailant, broke into her apartment in the middle of the night, between sometime 1 and 3 in the morning. Her bathroom in the apartments, these are single apartments for young students there, and it just had a restroom in the back and then a big living room or a bedroom area. And so she would always stay up late, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then she'd go take a shower or a bath, the rest of it's going to go to bed. Well, there was a terrible sound in the apartment that night, and the student across the hall, who was a pre-med student, heard a scream and what he thought was a choking sound. I have a copy of the tape of the 911 call. It's very unequivocal. It was my neighbor. I heard a screaming sound. I heard a choking sound. And so he quickly walked across the hall, knocked on it. Are you okay? Are you okay? No answer. No answer. So he went downstairs to the woman whose apartment was below her, and he knocked on the door because everybody was up late studying that night. It was a week of exams. And she said, that woman answered the door, and he said, did you hear anything up there in Shan's apartment? And the young woman down there said, yeah, I kind of heard like there was a struggle, like there was some rumbling of the moving around of the furniture. And he said, well, I'm going to go up and try again, otherwise I got to call 911, which he did. No answer still came. In 5 minutes, the police came to the door. And the two of them were rookie officers, junior people, and they had just come, not a lot of background in terms of that job, but they were there to try to do what he knew was the protocol and the path for the police force with a response time. And they have to push a lock on a button on the door to get let in. That's what the safety was of this apartment building, which is why we went there. You had to push a door, and someone from the inside has to push it to let you in. So he pushed the button, the two officers, he came in. Now then you would walk up to the second floor to my daughter's apartment, which had double locks on the door, which was another reason it was a safe place to be. So they walk up, the door was locked. When the policemen were there, no one knocked on the door. But in the back of each of the apartments, on the three floors of the back, they had a little small I should say legend, or a little patio like. It was only 2 feet by 4 feet. And when I was there with my husband looking into safety of the apartment, I asked the landlord who was there, I said, is anybody going to be able to get in here? He says, oh no. That's why we have that big tree out there with the barbed wire. We didn't want anybody to get into the back 3 apartments, see? So it's a really safe community, and besides, there's very low crime rate here, and she'll be fine. She'll be with a bunch of other students. Well, in the middle of that night, apparently, the assailant shimmied up between, these are old brownstone buildings in Center City, Philadelphia, just south of Rittenhouse Square, if you know that area of the country. And he had shimmied up between these brownstone buildings, they were only 2.5, 3 feet apart, and jumped over the side of that patio, and was listening, because see, he had stalked all his victims ahead of time. Shannon wasn't the first. He stalked them, so he knew exactly that they were living alone, what time of the day they were usually home, how you get in and out of there safely so he wouldn't get caught and get away. He needed to get out of there safely, and he kept doing his homework, and so he shimmied up, climbed over that thing, and waited for that shower to go off, turn on, so she probably wouldn't hear him, and then he shimmied the lock on that door, on the screen door, and broke in. So you can imagine, she came out of the shower, we're not sure if it was a shower or a bath, but there was water, and she was naked, and she screamed, oh my God, how did you get in? The scream is what the guy across the hall heard. And then there was more commotion and everything else. And after a while, there were no more sounds. Well, when the police got there, of course, there weren't any more sounds. They didn't hear any answer to that knock on the door. In fact, one of the officers went around to the back patio and shone a flashlight up on that entrance. No signs that anybody was inside there or had gotten in the door and closed, or she closed when he got in there behind it. He closed it. So the officers come back. Meanwhile, a bunch of the students in the building were gathering outside of my daughter's apartment. They heard this, the police there and all the commotion. And the police, they were trying to convince them, can't you take down the door? Can we go see what's going on? The police said, there's no signs of any forced entry. There's no noise coming from it. Hey, maybe some of that scream or something came from somebody having a TV on in one of their apartments. Or maybe somebody was up having a drink at one of the local bars and got a little noisy and came home and made a lot of noise in the apartment. But we have no reason to take down the door. And they left in about 5 or 6 more minutes. They were gone. And this guy across the hall, who was, I said, a pre-med student, and later I got to know him later in life when we get to that part of the story, he wishes always that he had done something then, but he tried. He says, I kept saying, he came to Mr. Schieber, I tried to keep talking to him, please take it down. And they said, there's no reason to take, there's no signs. And he walked away. Of course, the friend across the hall kind of stayed awake a little longer. He was studying too, and he didn't hear anything more, and finally went to bed because he had an exam that day. The next morning, my son, who was Shannon's best friend, they were about 20 months apart in age. This was Shannon, he was Sean. This is my fighting Irish background, a lot of it. He was planning to go up and visit her that day. He was going to stay with her the night before, the very night this all happened. Talk about everything going wrong that night, huh? He called her the day, or she called him the day before and said, Sean, honey, don't come up. I would love to go out for a great dinner, but this is the last night, and I got to study for this exam, and I'm not going to be any fun to be around. Why don't you just let me come up in the morning, and I'll have lunch with you. Your exam will be all over. You'll be really ready to start packing up and go home, and I'll be there, and we can have a nice lunch and everything. And she said, okay, Sean, I understand. I understand. Just think if he had been there. The next day he comes and he told her, I'll meet you in your cubicle over at the Wharton School, your study section where all the graduate students had, and I'll meet you there, and then you will be much more relaxed, I hope, and ready to go and enjoy a nice lunch. So he calls me before he leaves in the morning. He lived in an apartment in Washington, D.C., and he calls me, Mom, she can call me at my office. I'm ready to go now. I'll call you when I get to Shannon's cubicle. Everything will be okay, I'm hoping she's had a good morning, and I'll let you know as soon as I get there. When he gets to that cubicle, there's a bunch of people around saying, Sean, where's your sister? Where's your sister? And he says, well, I'm supposed to come and meet her here. We're going to have lunch. And he says, they say to him, she didn't come to the study group this morning. She didn't show up for the exam. Nobody, and we're trying to call her at her home, and nobody answers the phone. Of course, he knew there must be something wrong. This wouldn't have been my daughter. She was always ready and willing and moving forward. So I said, so he called me right away after that, and he said, Mom, I think there's something wrong here. And he said, I said, oh my God, he told me, I said, well, look, I'll tell you what you do, honey, please. Just go over. He knew where she lived, her apartment. Go down the street, be sure you know where she parks her car, check that the car's there and that the doors are all locked and everything, and then walk over to the apartment, which was a very short distance, and go around the back and see if the balcony door is open, closed, be sure, and then go around, and if you can't get in that way, just push the 6 buttons and see if somebody there will answer the door. And so I said, then call me right away. Let me know what's going on. Please, Sean. I will go praying. I remember walking into the ladies' restroom outside of my office and telling most of my staff, I'm waiting for this important phone call, And so I went into that restroom, and I have never in my life prayed so hard. Can you imagine? I just put my head down in my lap and I sobbed, please God, you know, this wasn't, everything was wrong. I could tell. Please give me whatever grace or whatever thing that helped me get through this, and let us know how we can continue to serve you. Well, that was the longest few hours of my life. There was no call for a long time. And I just went and shut the door to my office and kept praying. Finally, a call comes in, and my staff person answered, and it wasn't a male caller. A female called and told her, I have to talk to Mrs. Schieber right away, and could you make sure she gets to the phone? And she came in, she said, it's an urgent call. And I picked it up, and of course I hear a woman's voice. I says, Sean? I said, she said, no, I'm here with Sean. I was with some friends here to meet him because I knew him and from school and college and everything. And she said, you have to come. You and your husband have to come to Philadelphia right away to identify a dead body. Can you imagine? Oh, the grace you needed then. So I called my husband, and we picked up our stuff and went home. And it was just a long ride home. In fact, the head of the unit I was working for just drove me home. He wouldn't let me drive my car. And he knew what had happened. There was something wrong. And my husband was really rattled too when we got there, and we just drove the long way to Philadelphia to meet the police department and then go to the station, identify a body. And now begins the next era of this message about what you learn about something you never knew anything about. And never anything about the criminal justice system. I had never worked with it. I had never been involved. I never knew what a lot of the procedures were. And I didn't know kind of how the operations would work going forward. It was total confusion, not to mention the horrific grief. But the confusion, the unknown. And the police were trying to be very understanding. I think they really were. But it was when the questioning process began, and they had questioned my son before we ever got there, then they questioned my husband and I separately. And kind of the gist was, you know, are you sure your son came up here this morning? He didn't, I mean, there weren't any bad vibes between the two of them. There wasn't any sibling rivalry or anger management. And do you think maybe he really was up here last night and changed his mind? So he was like the primary subject. I mean, the primary possibility for solving this. I mean, can you imagine that? And I said, oh, they were best friends. This would never have been my son. I said, but we'll try to help in every way possible. That we really want this case be solved. We wouldn't want any other family, any other set of parents to go through this. So they questioned him, and they questioned us, and then we went down and we had to sign a lot of forms. And they gave us some of the procedures. We had to go identify the body. They were going to take us over to the funeral home tomorrow, and then they were going to give us a bunch of questions and help us to see that the body got transferred back to our parish, which was the Blessed Sacrament Parish right on Chevy Chase Circle there in Maryland, which was the parish we were living near at that time. And we began this long journey of incredible, life-changing events, and never, ever would have guessed about this. So the funeral was beautiful. There was this crowds full of people. Everybody loved her. She was so, and the priest did just a beautiful job of celebrating her life and telling about all the good community events she was involved in, all the contributions she had made. And he did something that I really, really liked at the end of it. He said, I hope all of you, when we learn more about this and understand this program, will do what I think she would be here today to say. We all have to find a way to make a difference. Don't let this be something that destroys you and ruins you. Go forward and try to do something to honor all the accomplishments we have made as a parish. She was in their committees there in the church, and she just had so many friends and people there. It was so moving. And the priest there had said very early on that this was a family of forgiveness, and they were going down this journey to try to get to that place. And thank God that was an enormous gift. So after all the things that have to go on, my husband and I and the family members, all 7 of his brothers, sisters, and all 7 of mine were all there. We talked about this very openly with them. I said, my husband, Phil, and I, we have been trying very hard to pray and find what the best decision is about going forward and everything. But right now we are moving toward, and we were thinking this very early, we knew about the sanctity of life. We were raised with that principle, that all life was sacred. You're never challenged as much as when it's someone like this, when it's your own family member. But if you, well, one of his favorite sayings is, if you have a set of principles you're raised with, and then they're tested in the worst possible way, and you don't stick to those principles when that happens, then were they ever your beliefs and principles in the first place? No. We knew the answer was no. If we believed in that sanctity of life, that this was a God's creature, whoever did this, we had to move forward on saving his life. And that it was the hard thing to do. A little more difficult for my husband early on because she was daddy's girl. You know, my husband's PhD was in economics and all the numbers lined up, and she was always in that field and doing things. And so they even talked about in the call the night before she died, saying, "Oh, Dad, I can't wait to come home. We're going to write some articles for journals or economic journals." And then she called me and I talked to her and I said, "You know, Mom, can we go shopping? I need a lot of things and get it organized when I get home, and we can go shopping together, maybe see a good movie or something." You know, these were all the memories that you're left with. You know, it's really was hard. But so we had to set down a plan, my husband and I. How were we going to find a way to heal? Because this was very hard on us. So I got very involved in murder victim family groups around the country. I was very much active in the support groups to help people get through this. Because again, my background was social work, and my understanding was that you had to understand the people. You had to understand what went on there. You had to reach out and learn, because I knew nothing about this system, the death penalty. I never knew what it did to murder victims' families, what it does to anybody that loses a loved one. You know, we had to study this together. We had to go through these experiences, and this wonderful opportunity to work with a murder victims' families group around the countries. And I met with them now in 22 different states, a bunch of them very early on. Sit down to talk with them, to say, "Tell me about your journey. How did you go forward? How did you get to the place of peace that you were seeking so much? And what kinds of advice can you give to us to help us?" This is so hard, because there'd be times I'd just be driving a car down the street, a perfect example, and that anger would come back then. And you know, that anger, this frustration, that wanting a little revenge. And I came to a stoplight. I was pounding on the wheels of the car. God, why? Why did this happen? And then like 2 blocks later, after I settled myself down and the light changed and I took a deep breath, I'm driving by. It was a Presbyterian church it was along this road right by the church. And there was a sign on the front of it with the message from that you're supposed to ponder for the next Sunday's services and ceremonies. And it said, whenever life gives you a question mark, whenever you have a question mark, God gives you the period. God tells you, this is my plan. I didn't want her to die, but I wanted this experience to be a learning and a growth experience for you. When you have this question marks, God has a period. And that gives you this peace that I can go forward now. I have his grace, amazing grace as I call it. And we could do some positive things to remember this. And so one of the ways I really learned this, some of my learning experience that I was talking to Deacon Larry about, was I would try to meet other victims' families who were really moved under a very difficult murder or story in their family. And I got to meet Bud Welch. Bud is the father of Julie Welch, who was murdered in the Oklahoma City bombing. She was 23, just like my daughter was 23 when she was murdered. They were born just a few, they were dead within a couple years of each other, because my daughter was 1998, in the late 90s, and she was in Oklahoma. And he stood up there in many speeches we did together around the country in some of this learning process, and we'd share our stories. And he would say, "You know what happened to me at the beginning? After I learned Julie was murdered, was in that building that day, she had just left to go to Mass that morning and then came back. And within half an hour, the office blew up." And he said, after I got that body back and identified it at the funeral, I started drinking. The next day I had my first, and I drank, and I drank, and I drank. I was so distraught. I was everything. And as the months went on, I lost my job. My wife left me. because he says this himself, I was just holding on to that anger. I was so vengeful. I wanted to catch that person. I wanted to put him to death. If they did that to my daughter, I'd want to do it. In fact, that's, my husband kind of really said early on, if I found out who strangled her, and that's how he eventually did it, he would have wanted to strangle him back. That's natural. That if you don't have to be a sociologist to know, that's a natural feeling of anger. It's whether you hold on to it and what do you do with it that can transform your life. And Bud Welch's story was just telling us, if I kept going on to that anger and trying very hard to do this, I would never, ever been going on to honor her. Because what you learn is you have to let all that negative energy, that terrible pain, you're never going to drain all the pain out, but the energy and the revenge and need for retribution drain out of you, and fill yourself with positive energy and go out and do something to honor the lives of your loved one. That was his message in that speech that day. He taught me so, so much. And it's a message I usually give in any murder victim settings, to tell them, praying that they don't hold on to that. They don't want vengeance. They won't. And I have seen it time and time again. I've testified before state legislatures, before the U.S. Congress on one of the committees that Sam Brownback, who then was Senator Brownback, chaired, and I got invited to testify. He's now, as you know, the governor of Kansas. And in there was another woman. Whenever you go to testify or speak about the story to educate people or to testify in favor of a bill that's going to pass repeal, they have someone who's totally pro-death penalty and someone who really wants this bill to pass and the repeal to happen. And so I testified before that committee, and here was the woman who they picked, whose daughter was murdered in Oklahoma, about the same age as Shannon, had gone through many of the same issues and problems with the system, and she started. This was 12 years later, mind you, when she testified. Her daughter had been murdered 12 years ago. And here she is before the senators up there on the stuff. And she opens her first program. The Senator Brownback asked her to go ahead and speak first. And she starts, "You senators, you can't know what this is like. It's been held for 12 years. They promised me when I had this horrible thing happen, I would find peace and justice. The prosecutor, some of the attorneys told us, this is how you're going to heal. You're going to get peace. We're going to get this person executed. We're going to give him the death penalty." And here I am waiting 12 years for her, and I met many other women and men who tell us that this is 15 or 20 years, and they're still holding on to it. And my husband's sister had one of the famous quotes, and I know this has been around a lot. I don't know who originated it. But there is a very common saying that's true, and you don't have to be a social worker or a psychology background to know that anger only kills the vessel that contains it. If you hold on to anger, for whatever the reason, if you hold on to it and you let it destroy, like it was doing to Bud Welch's life, it destroys you. And the gift I had and my family had is we could drain all that negative energy out and go do something positive to honor her. And so that is what started us on this journey of healing. First, I wanted to know, and this is partly my social work background, I wanted to understand, how did he get that guy, whoever this is. It took us, of course, 4 years to find them. It took the police and that, obviously. I wasn't looking. It took him 4 years. He had done 6 sexual assaults in the city of Philadelphia. 2 of them, the first 2, were not classified as a crime, and so not reported to the FBI. And that didn't help them start to begin to see this pattern of serial rape in that same neighborhood, 3 or 4 blocks outside of Shannon's apartment. They didn't know that. Later, there were 2 more rapes, all again within her very, very area of the city. And the police now started to see this pattern. And their practice, or their policy, is that after the 3rd pattern, and remember the first 2 they didn't count because they didn't believe them. They told the women that, oh, this was your boyfriend that did this, or you probably had too much to drink, or you knew the person was consensual, whatever. So by the fourth, Shannon was number 5. It would have been after they linked that Shannon's case to it, that they would have done what their usual pattern is. After the third identified, they go to the news stations and try to get a composite sketch. They try to inform the community about all this and let them know, be on your guard, don't walk at home at night. You see this in your local TVs and places. And then in the university world, like they would have done at the University of Pennsylvania, they send emails around and warn all the students. They give them advance notice. Be sure that you're not walking alone at night, all those sort of things. Shannon never knew that. There was nothing announced about that story. So when she was walking home that night after a late study session, just before this happened later in the night, she had been over on campus studying. She thought this guy that she noticed was kind of following around was just trying to pick her up, or, you know, she's a very, very attractive, outgoing person. And so she tried to duck out of the way to get back to her apartment so he wouldn't know where she lived. Well, she didn't succeed, obviously. And he did his homework, and that's how he ended up in her apartment 2 nights later, because Shannon never had any reason to suspect that this was going on. So back to this part where I was saying I really wanted to understand this person, and it took him 4 years. He was only in Philadelphia till a year and a half after that, from 1998 until into 1999, early 2000. And then he moved to Colorado. Gets a job out there with the military, high service maintenance, and what do you call that? You reviewed for being able to be accepted, and you had a real background check and everything. Of course, he had no criminal record that was anywhere recorded. So he moves to Fort Collins, Colorado. His job was kind of up in Cheyenne, working on the military maintenance, high valued job up there. Within a year after that, he gets married. And it starts within another year. The same pattern on the campus of Fort Collins, of Colorado State University in Fort Collins. The same pattern. Middle of the night, the same 1 to 3 a.m., doing his homework, breaking into the apartment in the middle of the night, raping them, and then quickly wanting to leave and escape. And he'd been successful. And he was successful there almost 7 or 8 more times, before the police in Fort Collins started to get a little bit suspicious, seeing the pattern. People came forward. They started announcing it on the TV, on the radio. It became very obvious. And after a period, it was in 2002, in the spring, 4 years after Shannon died, that they brought him in to be interviewed, and it's a long story, and I don't know that I can tell all about this, but it's high technology. It was amazing what they can do today. It's just amazing. This was 2002. After they brought him in for questioning, and the reason they could bring him in is that they had done this computer tech search on. They had a credit card. They had a driver's license. Once you have that, he could find all the times he used his driver's license in the city of Philadelphia, or in the state of Pennsylvania. It was a Pennsylvania license plate between 1998 and 2000. Between 2000 and 2002, they could match. It was the same driver's license with the one when he went over and opened it in Colorado. Then he had a credit card that he was using. And they went through huge databases, which must have taken hours. And they sorted out who could be likely suspects. And of course, they ended up with 50 or 60 names. They threw out all the women in the sample. They threw out all the older men, and they kept whittling it down to a few very possible suspects. I'll get that right. And they invited them each in to meet with them. And so on the night of April 23rd, 2002, he got a call at his home after work and said, "You and your wife need to come to the police department. I want to interview him." It went on for hours, and I don't have all the details, of course, but at the end of it, early morning hours, he confessed. He confessed, when the bargain was that if he confessed to all those sexual assaults and to the capital murder of Shannon Schieber, that he could get what he wanted, which was not to have capital punishment, not to be put to death, and he could go to a prison in Colorado, which is where his current wife and the family, where things that were going on were at the time. And now the Philadelphia prosecutor didn't like this at all. Philadelphia, Aaron, you all know this in different parts of the world. Different people are very pro death penalty, and her pattern was, and she had been in the news, in public news, Philadelphia Inquirer, Philadelphia Daily News, very upset with my husband and I because we came out openly that we were not going to support. If they ever catch this guy, we were not going to support the death penalty. The prosecutor wanted it. At that time, in just 2002, 1/3 of the people on death row in the state of Pennsylvania came from her jurisdiction in Philadelphia. 1/3 of them. And that happens in many states, as you know. There's a great number of... And so, you know, she came out in the press and said, I don't care what the Schiebers think. This was a very high-value criminal, and this was a heinous crime, and we have to get him off the streets, and he's going to be put on death row. So you can imagine, if you weren't dealing with enough things and tried to put things together, here you had this big fight with what was going to happen when they caught him. Well, when he sat there that night and testified and said, I will plead guilty to all of this if I do not get the death penalty, and if you will let me go to prison here in the state of Colorado. And they accepted that and signed it. So now, picture this. It's April the 23rd, 2002. By May the 31st of 2002, 5 weeks later, he's remanded into the court of Philadelphia, because that's where the capital crime was, and he had to come to get the sentencings there before the judge in that jurisdiction. He comes to that courtroom in Philadelphia. 5 weeks later, the judge gives him the sentence, life without the possibility of parole, sentences him to a maximum security prison in the state of Colorado. And that ended it for us, ended it in terms of what could have been a 15, 16, 17-year period, which is the average time it takes someone to be executed who has been given the death penalty, if they execute them at all. Do you imagine what all these families, this is what I learned from all those murder victim families I talked to. Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Schieber, you don't want to go down that road. You're going to be dragged in and out of the courts, you and all the other victims, and you're going to relive all this all over again, and you're going to be having to watch, and there's all these appeal processes that grow, and you live it and live it. And that's what can just kill you. It just holds on to that anger. You just keep wanting to go back, and it burns you alive. It just, and I've heard this from so many murder victims that I had interviewed. You don't want to go down that road. It's going to destroy you too, just like Bud Welch said. It did all that to his life. He had to let it go. So 5 weeks after he was caught, we could all of it was over. We didn't have to go to the courts anymore. He was put away. We knew we didn't worry, or I wasn't waking every night worrying some other mother and dad was going to have to go through this. I couldn't take it. We just had to go forward. So we found Shannon wanted to make a difference. What are we going to do to make that? Because we really felt that this was the way to honor her. She was so social justice oriented and everything. So the part of the healing process I wanted to start out with, after we learned that we didn't have that facet of it all to worry about, is I wanted to talk to the murderer's family. I wanted to talk. They were from Philadelphia area because that's where he was living at the time. He had a brother and his mother. His father, again, this is a part of the story. His father had died a few years before this happened of drug addiction. And the mother, once I did get the phone number and they allowed me to call her, I called her and I told her who I was. And I said, now, if you don't want to talk to me, I am the mother of the woman that your son killed, and I respect that. I will hang up the phone. I just want you to know, I really just wanted to share a few things and talk to you. If you're comfortable with that. If you're not, I will hang up. She said, oh, no, Mrs. Schieber, I've been wanting to talk to you. Oh, I wanted to talk to you. She said, and then she started sobbing and sobbing. Of course, I was too. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Schieber. I was the one who murdered your daughter. As you can imagine. What? She says, it's my fault. And then she proceeded to tell the story. And we were, like I say, both sobbing for a long time. I married this wonderful man. I thought everything was going to be a great and happy marriage. And then he had a good job. And a few years later, we had two sons. One was about 5 years older than the younger one. The younger one murdered my daughter. And And then he lost his job first, she said. And then he kept looking for a job. He couldn't look right. He kept getting more and more depressed and everything. And pretty soon he came to me and he said, honey, I think I found a way to make some money. I can't get this job. I'm going to go sell drugs. I'm going to be selling drugs. And I have a group of people I know that work and you can make some money on the streets there in Philadelphia, and I'm going to be selling drugs. And so he did that for a while, which helped, of course, pay for the kids' clothes and school and food on the table. And she said, but then after a couple of years, he started taking them. And it got worse and worse. And then she said he'd come home at night and there was terrible, horrific domestic violence in our home with our two sons growing up and watching that. In fact, one time she told me this one and it brought more tears even. She said, but my sons, this is why I feel like I was responsible for your daughter's death, is my sons kept coming to saying, Mom, we got to get out of here. Daddy is bad. We've got to leave. Daddy's bad. We'll go somewhere. And she said, I struggled with that. And finally had to tell them, I have no education. My little ones, I have no education. I have no job. I don't know how I can support you. I just have to get through this with that, you know. And the kids were very much affected by this horrible tone in the family. And it was very hard for them. And so finally, later in life, when I did talk to the brother, then after I talked to the mother, I called the brother. He corroborated everything she said. And he said, you know, it was really more devastating on the younger boy because I was a little older. I was in school. I could go play soccer after school. I was doing things. He was there in that house a lot longer. And he said, and Mrs. Schieber, he had terrible anger management. He just couldn't deal with some of these things. And it really started to affect his whole upbringing and everything else. And so then that helped me a lot because I could understand where he had come from, what was his background. Because look at it this way. Look at it this way. Here was my daughter, born in this family with a loving and supportive family and a strong faith and the best education and the gifts of so much of community life and everything. And here was someone, think of it, that had almost the exact opposite. No strong family support, very big family problems, everything that had difficulties with his life. There but for the grace of God go I, right? That could have been my son. And that woman could have had my daughter. And it could have been a very different picture. I had no control about that. If you realize what a gift you've had and what an amazing thing has to happen, and you're more understanding. The more you understand what someone else has gone through, you walk a mile. I've worked with a lot of American Indian groups, services when I was with the Department of Health and Human Services. I visited all the native tribes and been around to different parts of the country. And they taught me one saying that was very helpful in my healing process too. You never understand someone until you've walked a mile in their moccasins. It really helps the healing process. You understand where somebody else has gone, and you can really understand it. Another thing that helped in that healing process, and when Deacon and I were talking about this yesterday, another thing I didn't know is back then when we were deciding about the death penalty, and we told people this when I was speaking, do you know what happens? For every time there is an execution in the state, there's a death warrant, there's a death certificate that has to be signed. And it is usually listed as a state-sponsored execution, right? A state-sponsored execution. But if somebody, let's say, was in a state that didn't want it or wanted this person dead so fast and they kept pounding on the table and going to the prosecutors, I want him dead. I want him dead. If I had felt like that way and I really wanted, and I kept that anger bustling in me all these years, I would talk to God. I would have my name on that death certificate. It was my responsibility. It was my husband and I who wanted that. We could never have lived with that. I never could have lived with that. Imagining standing before God someday and going, well, we have you down here, St. Peter says, well, you know, you wanted this person murdered. There was nothing I could do to live with that, So we were so grateful. A blessing of unbelievable proportions that they decided to give him life in prison without control. So now, then I wanted to do the next healing step besides the family and the brother and reaching out to people, murder victims' families especially, and belonging to these groups. I wanted and prayed so hard. Every day, every year. Every morning I woke up. In the morning, my first prayer was for him. Please, God, Thank you for the peace and the gifts that you've given us as a result of this. Please let that happen for him. Please let him be forgiven, because we have. And we want him to get experience there in that prison. Didn't talk about getting him out. We wanted him to learn and to adjust and to grow as a person. And I kept begging the prison warden and a lot of the people there, because he had a terrible time when he got there. Horrible time. And they would, one of the other prison wards would talk to one of the victims in Colorado, and she would call and tell me, do you know what happened with him in the prison? The first couple of years, it was the severe anger management. One time he was so beaten up by a couple of the other inmates that he had both kneecaps broken and all his ribs on one side broken. They had to put him in an infirmary. And then they moved him to another prison because he had such a problem adjusting to that institution. And then they had to go through all that. But I said, okay, this has been 13 years now since they caught him. And I kept writing to a victims advocate person there in Colorado. I wanted to meet with maybe the warden, or could I please get a chance to come in or to communicate with him. Maybe we start with a letter. We could just get a pattern set up. I wanted to hear how he was doing. That would heal me so much if I knew that it was an experience that ended well for him, as we were thanking God every day for our blessing. Well, this letter came in August the 20th of 2015. 13 years later, I get the very first letter at a special wave, a dispensation from the warden to let him let him communicate with me, or for me to communicate with him, which I did first. And I have with me on the 20th of August, the first time they allowed him to answer my letter, which was very open, warm at the beginning, saying we were praying for him, we wished him that he hoped that he was healing, that his life had gotten better, because I knew what his first several years were, just horrific. So on August the 20th, I'll let you read just a couple parts of it. And if you can imagine, when I got this letter in the mail that day, he could have been 6 feet under in the ground executed, This is the healing power of rehabilitation and the chance for a life to be redeemed by God. I had no right. God was going to save him because that prayer was there. And I sent the letter. Finally, Vicki, Mrs. Schieber, I was so happy and extremely grateful upon receiving your very kind words. Because the earthly powers here at prison at last granted you and your patients the first step. The first step meant for me, I still wanted to get to go and talk to him in person, get to know him, be his pen pal there in prison. He says, I offer my deepest apologies to you and your family for the suffering I have caused you. Please know I truly regret that our entwinement is due to my appalling actions, and whatever the future holds for us, your words haven't been wasted on me. My mother passed away early in 2013, and I'm saddened I won't get to share our first step with her. She had lots of heartfelt respect for you, so I know this would have brightened her life too. I will also share with you that I have used these all years, and I have worked through many of my issues on my own with self-examination and prayer. I believe my mother knew me both at my mental apex and at peace before she passed. As he evolved over those years, she was doing well and still communicating with him. At the very end, he closes by saying, I will certainly write a letter of thank you to the warden for his discretion in our case. I hope these words find you well and help you as your words have helped me. And please don't hesitate to ask if there is anything I can provide to improve your journey. Stay well for you and yours. My best wishes and prayers for you always. I never say his name in public. It's certainly online anywhere you want to know, but it's healing for me. I don't advertise this. And many of the problems with murder victims' families, especially when they're going off through all the courts and all this big case that gets relived when they go to trial and all this, is they always talk about the assailant. They talk about their families and everything else. The murder victims' families often are ignored. They're just off the path. So we have a pattern of just not ever mentioning his name, but he is really in our hearts and in our prayers every single day. And as I said, so much incredible good has come out of this. I want to leave some time at the end to answer some questions, but I have to tell you, remember I told you that this was a journey from pain to peace and promise. And you cannot believe the wonderful, positive things that have happened out of this. If you think you've been to your lowest depths of despair and sadness, and then to be able to tell and share some things that are so positive that came from it. One of the things, Shannon loved education and everything, so a bunch of the students at school and at Duke, who knew her really well, talked to the people at Duke University, and they set up a scholarship fund, Shannon Schieber Scholarship Fund, which over these last 12, 13 years now has raised $300,000. That's our current balance in that account. And we educate the students there, and they pick a person every year to get the scholarship who is a female, who's very bright and talented and has leadership potential, and they award it to that person who probably maybe couldn't have ever afforded to go to a school like Duke. Then at Mount St. Mary's University, where I have worked for the last 5 years, I run the Office of the Catholic Mobilizing Network in the campus. I am the education coordinator for Catholic Mobilizing Network, and there's a couple sheets in your folders that have some information about that and contact. And I got to staff that office. I worked with the students. It was an opportunity for me to teach. I taught death penalty classes. I helped them do internships to manage our website and do studying and more research on death penalty issues. And I had some of the best students you'd ever believe. So at the end of last year, they set up the scholarship fund. It's called the Shannon Schieber Social Justice Prize, and that'll go for a student every year to give her some. Doesn't necessarily have to be her. It gives a student a chance to pay for part of their tuition and take advantage of this. But there's two really big things that are just amazing that came out of this. So after this story came out all over the papers about what was going on in Philadelphia, there was a group in Philadelphia called the Women's Law Project. And they were a group of female attorneys that did research and publications and testimony and tried to educate people about some of the social justice issues. They called us very shortly after this, probably would have been about 2004-5 time frame, and they said they wanted to get more grants and develop programs that would study what happened to the police and what was going on in that department. Why didn't they listen to those early victims? Why did these patterns take so long? Why wasn't this caught? And so so they wanted to set up a training program and to teach police in police jurisdictions all over the country. Now they've been used in 1,680 police jurisdictions across the country. These women at the Law Project got grants from the FBI and the criminal justice system, and in every one of the grants, which they would have me read or talk before they submitted it and say prayer for too, everyone started to begin, we want to do this study because Shannon Schieber should not have had to die that night. Beautiful testimony, beautiful. And it's now being, as I said, taught all around the country. And I can't help but believe that many lives have been saved. I will never know about that, doesn't matter. I just know that there will be other families that won't have to go through this experience. And it was a pattern. The pattern was called Downgrading of Crime. And what police across it was major cities. It was in Memphis. It was in Atlanta. The Law Project uncovered all this, the pattern that was going on in a lot of major cities. And what the purpose was, the police, their good intentions were trying to make the city look safe. They wanted a big political convention to be to come to Philadelphia in the year 2000. And they wanted the city to be safe. They wanted businesses to come and set up in Pennsylvania, but they want to know that that's safe. And they really wanted to know what to do and teach about getting a good crime number. And so what crime do you think is most likely that you can cover or hide and not report? If you got a homicide, you got a dead body, you got to count it. If you got this, other crimes are very obviously, you can identify more easily, maybe more DNA and everything else. But the sexual assaults issue was the easiest for them to cut on rates. And they had been doing that for a pattern of a decade or more in Philadelphia before this thing. One night we met with two of the prosecutors, or two of the police officers, I should say, afterwards. And we said to them, didn't you know that this possibly could harm someone if you weren't telling people early enough that it was in their neighborhood? Couldn't this be a damage to them? And one of the officers at the crime unit just went like this, just the way the system worked. Just the way the system, we've been doing this for years. That's just the way the system worked. They didn't think of these things, I guess. So anyway, that's hopefully changing now too, and then more of this is coming about. And then I have to tell you this wonderful story about my son. He was the one that went in there and found this blood spatter department, remember? The blood all over the wall, his naked sister's dead body across the bed. And he collapsed on the floor. It was the guy across the hall, see, when he went to push all those buttons on the door, the guy across the hall who had made the 911 call the night before pushed the button and let him in. And he walked up the stairs to the second floor, and the guy had come out from his apartment right across from Shannon's. And my son says, I went over to find my sister. Nobody answers the phone. She didn't show up for the exam or anything this morning. Do you know what's going on? Do you know anything that's happening? And he just turned pale white and started shaking. And he says, come on, we're going to do this together. He says, we're going to go in. And they ran and pushed down the door. Because he tells my son, I tried to convince them. There were other students that said, well, can't you at least go in and check? You know, maybe. Just think if they had caught him, even if Shannon had died by then, he wouldn't have gone to Colorado. He wouldn't have harmed all these other lives. You know, think about it. Maybe these two officers, and I pray for them too, because you might have done that, could have, would have, should have too. You know, they thought they were following department policy. That's what we wanted to do and trying to change it. So my son fell on the floor, but I couldn't believe. And they talk about prayers every morning. Please, God, help this guy heal. For a while, he didn't want to date anybody. He was afraid somebody was going to die, and he was really carrying a lot of pain. And of course, as a social worker, I could understand some of that. But now comes the promise and the happy ending. He's just healed so beautifully. I'm so happy to tell you. He went on to live in Spain for a year. He was supposed to take the job as soon as Shannon got home. He was going to move to Spain for a year and a half and work in like a Berlit school where you write. He was writing the computer programs to teach Spanish students, people there, how to speak English if they were going to go work in, you know, Canada, the United States, wherever they were speaking English. So he went there for a year and a half. Of course, we went and visited him. We kept checking on him. That was a healing journey for him. And now he lives down the street a mile from us in New Market, Maryland, and a beautiful place not far from where we live, and has 3 beautiful grandchildren. Talk about the grace of God, the gifts of life. They are the oldest one is 8, and there's one that just turned 6, and there's a 3-year-old. And the oldest one just looks like her. One of them may have a personality like her, but the oldest one has her mind. Absolutely brilliant girl too. Just a little Shannon. One of them talks a whole lot too, so that, you know, that's another side of her. But they're all part of her, and they know her really well. They come in the house and say, "Did Shannon talk to you this morning, Mom?" I always tell them. I said, "Yeah, Shannon and I communicate very much, you know." And you know, it's like, okay, Vicki, Mom. She goes, "Mom, what state are you going to now? I mean, where are we going to work?" And then every time that we come down to the vote being in the center, in that legislature, after we worked for several months talking to the legislators, working with the teams there, it's amazing, a strong group of people. They would say, I'd say, "Shannon, you have to go talk to the powers that be, please. We need that legislature to pass it." You know, so she's always getting me connected to her. I'm connecting her with all of this. And I think that's probably the crowning jewel is what I have in terms of the gifts of these children. But so much good has come out of this, so much of a promise. And I can't be more grateful every day at the healing, especially when I watch what other people have gone through and they can't let it go. It's something to pray for all the time. In that folder that is Mary Helen passed out, we have a couple of handouts here. One is some of the facts, and these are updated all the time on that website. The website is listed here at the bottom at I got written here on the second page, catholicsmobilizing.org. You can check that out. We have the states that we're working in, and we do a statistical update frequently about what's going on in that state, where the bill is going, or what's been the previous bill, and what the likelihood is as we go forward. And this is, I found, very helpful, the work I do, and certainly with the work you do would be very helpful. Although Bishop did very well at saying all the the right things about the teachings of the church. But this whole thing is called What Every Catholic Should Know About the Death Penalty. This is very valuable when I'm out talking with college students or high school students, people that don't know much about it. It's an informative thing. And on the second page of that is a sheet called Facts About the Death Penalty. And you'll notice this was last updated October 8th because these things change very much. As you know, Nebraska just became recently our 19th state. If that holds on, and you all probably know well that it may not, it's going to the referendum in November 2016. And boy, do I need your prayers for them. We got a long way of educating, going back in Nebraska, keeping up the education process, sharing this, because what has happened now is if it passes and the state voters overturn it, then it undoes all the work we did to get the repeal process going on. And the important thing to us was that this was the first red state to pass repeal, that state number 19. But think of it this way. When I first started this in Shannon after she died, guess what? There were only 9 or 10 states, I think maybe, that had passed repeal. Look where we are now. And it's because this group is so strong and it's growing. We have these coalitions in the states on the ground. We have various groups that are working to identify possibilities and help raise funds for this. Do you know who one of our biggest fundraisers are for our coalitions across the country? The European Union. The EU donates a great deal to this effort because they think, as I've heard them say to me many times in that country, in the countries in the EU, how come you're a democracy. I mean, you live outside of Washington, D.C., Mrs. Schieber. How come your country has that horrible laws? Why do you keep that on the books? This isn't the United States of America. It's biased. It's very, very flawed. People are not, look at all the people being exonerated off death row. They hear about it over there. They just think aren't you embarrassed that that's a law of your country? And we're known by the company we keep. Do you know the other 4 or 5 big countries? We wouldn't want to be identified in that group of countries that still actively execute people. It's a really sad thing. So anyway, thank you for being here today. I can answer some questions if we have time. I just wanted you to know where the resources were, and I really loved being here with you and sharing this with you. And thank you for listening. Thank you. Oh, okay. Call me back up. You're going to start the question?
I'm going to start.
Good.
Yeah.
He knows a lot of the answers better than I do. Oh, no, I've got it here. I think. I don't know. Is it? Okay, honey. Switch. Here's my boss. Here we go. I'll take this out of here. There you go. Thank you. Oh, the other one. I'll go there before. The cords are coming.
2 of them.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll just hold those. I'm not going to be up here that long. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vicki. What a powerful story. I'm Denny Davis. I'm a permanent deacon from the Diocese of Sioux Falls.